We will be hosting our next panel session, so could my lovely panelists come up? I'm going to be moderating this panel, so I'll be the one asking the questions, which is great because you can hear my voice again. So this is a nice panel. We're going to discuss advertising from really from a success perspective, and it's quite a great panel because we're across all sectors. We're from both demand and supply. So I'm going to go and sit over here. I do not need a mic, so my friends, help yourself to mics. And what I think that the first thing we'll do is just get everybody quickly to introduce themselves while this lot are getting themselves sorted. I think it's already turned on. I don't think you have to worry about it. So I'm going to start with you, Alexi. If you could just introduce yourself, tell people a little bit about what you do, what side of the ad side of things, what side of the ad perspective you're on, then that would be great.
Sounds good. So my name is Alexi Gusev. I'm with Stillfront Group. I'm lead performance marketing, and we're acting some kind of an internal marketing hub. So basically helping with the marketing and UA activities for the studios from the Stillfront Group, which there are quite some of. What I'm responsible, or like what is my side of ads, is basically user acquisition to a major extent. So all the SDK networks, paid social, Google, what is working there, success factors, and so on. That's probably my forte.
That's great. And Tony's from AppLovin. So AppLovin needs no introduction, I'm sure, amongst this audience. But Tony, tell us about your good self.
Yeah, sure. I'll give a bit of an introduction anyways, just in case there are people out there. Oh, hey. AppLovin is a mobile marketing platform. We effectively help developers of pretty much all sizes either scale their games through our app discovery platform, and then also monetize their games better through our ad network and also our mediation platform, Max. I personally am on the business development team, and I kind of straddle both the UA side and also the monetization side too. But yeah,
Great.
That's it in brief.
And Nina?
Yep. Hi everyone, thanks for joining us. So I'm Nina Mackie, I work with ADSME. So we're an ad tech company. We provide SDKs to help monetize advertising inside games. So native, audio, video, clickable. My role there is on the demand side, so I actually deal with advertisers and brands on a daily basis. So obviously today we'll cover some of the sort of common questions that we get from advertisers and what makes them likely to buy advertising in your games.
I'm Charlotte. I am MD and founder at Consultancy. So I work with publishers and developers, advising them on how to integrate and partner with brands within their games. So be that through ad solutions or licensing, and sort of understanding how they can collaborate with brands within their games.
That's great. So we've sat people very strategically, with Tony straddling both sides of the fence, which is clever. So this panel's all about success. And success means many different things to many different people. From a UA standpoint, where do you what's your key success metric?
Yeah, so basically success from the UA perspective, it's what kind of incremental uplift every new successful ad brings. What I can say that, especially now with post the ATT rollout, the importance of the UA creative hasn't been as big as even before. It's basically the main leverage for us to scale up the campaigns. Like I've seen anecdotal successes of scaling up the game budget like 10x for several months with a successful creative. So yeah, basically scalability, that being able to use this creative across multiple ad networks or partners. And yeah, positive user feedback is one of the also important things.
Interesting, that sort of straddles everything, doesn't it? The user feedback. From a platform perspective, Tony, what's it's still a Mac. So what do you, when you're looking at what mediation is doing, or from the platform perspective, what do you think are the key success metrics from an advert's perspective?
Yeah, so I suppose from a publisher perspective, the main thing that you're looking to achieve, at least with the traditional ad formats, is maximizing your LTV. So including ads in like a thoughtful way that are engaging to users and don't interrupt their gameplay, but also provide value to them and enable that trade-off, right? Where you're actually allowing players to have maximize enjoyment and maximize retention, while also generating revenue, right? Because we're all here to run games as a business, really. So I suppose that's the like key metric overall, is maximizing your LTV, which really combines like ARPDAU, retention, and everything else on top of it.
Great.
Yeah.
Well, that's and the interesting thing again was the fact that you're talking about player enjoyment, because you can't maximize revenue without the player enjoyment, can you? I mean, I know Oscar here will throw games away because they don't have the right kind of advertising in them. So Nina, let's talk about your experience, because you've got a lot of in-game experience, haven't you, from looking at non-intrusive formats and things like that?
Yeah, sure. So I'm actually obviously on the advertiser side, and predominantly the last 3 years I've been working with a relatively new format, which is a native in-game format. So you may have seen this perhaps on a billboard in like a racing game, it could be around a football pitch. So the design of it is very non-intrusive, and it was created really as an additional format that's not as disruptive. So generally speaking, hyper-casual games have a lot of rewarded video, a lot of interstitial, and the main source of revenue comes in from those formats. But it's a bit of a trade-off and a challenge, because when you look at the reviews, it's quite hard to get that balance right, and quite often gamers and players are frustrated because it's interruptive. So yeah, along came sort of this native format, and there's various different versions of it. You've got sort of video, you've got audio, more recently, and I think that evolution over the last few years has actually been based on feedback from both the publisher side and the gamers to build something that's really new, and as you said, gives you that value experience, but without necessarily, they're not always clickable, so you don't have the thing that you would have in a rewarded video where it's adding instant value. So you've got to be really clever about where you put these ads, and I think that's something that on our side we educate publishers that if you're going to use these non-intrusive formats, they have to be viewable, they have to be in the right place, they have to be, if you've got a racing game and they're on the side and someone is driving past at 90 miles an hour, that's not viewable, right? It's going to flash up for a second and then it's gone. So, just encouraging and educating people to put them at the beginning or the end of the race, or in a garage scene, something like that. So there's a lot of work still to be done, but I think the good news is that there's some really, really good quality formats out there. You can use multiple formats.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's.
And ADSME stands for ads in games, which I think is a great kind of twist on a name. It's kind
That's
of a cool.
Our French CEO.
Yeah, well, yeah.
A good pun there for the company.
Guillaume's creative genius. And Charlotte, just segueing on from what Nina was talking about there, you're talking to a lot of brands about what they're looking for from their advertising, and we know it's still a challenge to get brands to come and put their ad bucks into games, even though games is honestly to me very obvious, but brands still have some challenges. So what do you say to them success metrics should be to encourage them to bring that revenue into the games?
I think, it depends what they want to achieve. So, there's different ad formats that have sort of direct call to actions, maybe brand awareness, where the native format is better. I think when you're looking at sort of lots of the sort of branded experiences that we're seeing in things like Roblox now, those are really good for content creation for brands. So you can go in, you can get sort of influencers, TikTokers going in, playing the game and capturing that and then reusing that material for campaigns. So it kind of increases the longevity of it's not just an ad in the game in situ, it's something you can then use, through sort of a wider social campaign. Which is, I think, why actually a lot of the money is going towards those experiences, initially. There's a big education piece. I think people still see gaming and gamers in quite a two-dimensional way. So all the reports that are coming through on, the increase in female gamers, the amount of time people invest in gaming, the different kinds of games, that just helps the education piece back to brands, to understand that this is a really diverse audience of people now that you can reach who are investing considerable time and money into these experiences, and therefore probably if it works for them, we'll do the same with your brand if you target them in the right way. I think the one thing I always advocate is don't be too obvious. You know, sort of try and think of creative ways that people will want to interact with and enjoy and come back to, so it's not just a one-off tick box exercise.
Absolutely. Nina, did you want to add something there?
I mean, sure. I think, again, I'm obviously not on the publisher side, but I think from an advertiser side, there was a survey done by eMarketer like end of last year showing like 93% of media buyers want to buy in-game. So, you know, the demand is there, and I think you touched on a really good point. It's education on the game developer side as well as the advertiser side. There's still quite a lot of misconceptions there. I mean, I've heard this stat, I don't know if it's true, but it might be, about 85% of people who are buying gaming don't actually know anything about gaming.
I would be surprised by that stat at all.
I'm not that surprised about it, just in case anyone comes to get me. But you know, certainly I'm having these conversations with huge brands, you know, very senior marketing people, and they don't understand gaming and they don't understand the audiences. And I think, going back to what Charlotte was saying there as well, it becomes quite a challenge to do an authentic advertising experience if you don't know how your audience interact with games.
Well, that's why we were lucky to have somebody like Charlotte who can actually interpret games back to brands, because it's definitely, I'm starting to see in agencies there are gaming directors and stuff like that, and that's great, but still they're talking a different language back to a brand. Tony, you said when we were talking about this before that you've seen a rise in these different ad formats in games from a monetization standpoint.
Yeah, definitely. I think if we look back, let's say even 5 years or so, like I think 0% of the top 50 grossing games had any form of ad format whatsoever inside of them. Whereas now, yeah, you can just scroll through the top 10 and you're going to find, I don't know, 20, 25, maybe up to 50% that have at least integrated rewarded video, because it's effectively no longer an option to choose not to monetize 90 or 80% of your user base.
Yeah.
Because there are definitely users that just won't make in-app purchases, and then there are loads of users that, the vast majority of them, that like really enjoy ads. I think there can sometimes be like a bit of a misconception about how users feel about ads. But yeah, when you actually think about it as well, I think 80–90% of the users that are acquired for games are acquired via performance marketing, so via advertising.
By our man here.
Exactly.
And so, do you have you looked at other ad formats, or do you have your favorite go-to formats from a UA perspective?
Definitely, but can I play a bit of a devil's advocate here and kind of pivot the role or pivot the discussion in a bit different direction? I like the information that Tony gives, and I absolutely see in the same trends. Simultaneously, you need to be cautious and you need to be knowledgeable about the game that you're running. As in, it is important to understand when and if you'd like to integrate the in-game ads as well. Like we had a case for the mid-core, hardcore strategy that has been on the market for some years, where we tried to integrate the in-game ads, and it kind of generated rather positive feedback from the audience. So from that point, at least, that was fine. However, after 3 months, we have analyzed, and our average revenue per user actually have decreased, as opposed to monetization with the IAP. Simultaneously, some other cases that are, like for the games that are a bit more casual, with a bit wider appeal, we have seen a very great success, where the monetization, like average revenue per user or per daily active user, has increased 20, 30, 40%, even with the introduction of the in-game ads. So it's unfortunately or fortunately not like black and white, as I would maybe like it to be. It's more about gray line and just figuring out the right ratio, figuring out the right game, and kind of like basing your decisions on the data ultimately, and knowing your audience.
Harder and harder now. Because we don't have as much data as we used to have to base our decisions.
Yeah, thank you, Apple.
And you know, everybody else is following with different policies. I mean, how do you feel from a UA standpoint about what you've got to play with now, and how do you get the best success out of your ads? Is it down to test?
Yes, unfortunately. Finally, like from my perspective, and I was kind of going on and on about that, I don't think that the testing of the creatives changed fundamentally with the post the ATT rollout, or not for all of the games. Again, when you are able to get majority of your information through scan within your day one, or enough signals for the ads to be tested properly, nothing has changed, or not too much has changed for you. There is the privacy threshold, there are other things like channels and so on, yes, but ultimately you still have quite a lot of opportunities where to go. For the strategy genre, like mid-core, hardcore games, where it's way more about retention and long-term monetization, yeah, you need to be figuring out proxy signals, you need to be figuring out the signals that are indicating that your users are going to stick with the game way earlier, whilst also keeping track of the IPM, CTR, CVR, all the upper funnel metrics, CPM as one of the indicators, and so on and so forth. So yeah, incremental testing generally. But again, the biggest success that we have seen is going with the creative was kind of going counter trend. The percentage of those successes is very low, but when you nail it, or when you find these golden nuggets, it's all worth it. Even half a year of useless tests, it's definitely worth to have that.
That's good to hear that even you are finding that it takes half a year to really hit that golden nugget. It's not all of us kind of trudging through all of this thinking, oh my God, how are we doing this? So even the expert here is finding that happens too. So from your perspective with ATT and all the different changes, how are you seeing that affect things from a platform perspective and your interactions with developers over the success of their adverts?
Yeah, sure. I actually have a question for you.
Go, ask.
So right now, at least our platform still mostly relies on probabilistic matching, right, for creative optimization. So there hasn't been a massive downtrend in terms of this. Where we generally focus in terms of creatives is ones that really convey the value of the game to a user. And what we find works best are ones that stick to one message and really convey something key that motivates your actual players inside of the game and shows them this value. But yeah, I think my question for you was, how do you look at the trade-off, with IPM retention and somewhat misleading ads?
Ooh, that's a hot question.
That's a curveball, Tony.
It is a curveball. It is, and again, it kind of depends. It depends on the game. Ultimately, one of the metrics that we are looking at is the cost per engaged user, depending on the game, whether it could be day 3, day 7, when we have the transparency, for Android, for example. So this is exactly one of the metrics that we are looking for, checking the ads against. However, you definitely know that IPM is also or higher IPM has also opened up quite a lot of inventories for you when you're going into the auction. So yeah, it is complicated to nail it down. There is definitely a certain trade-off going on. There is also misleading ads policy from Facebook that I guess mixed things up a bit, although they're not as strict as one would have expected when they were communicating that. But for us, one of the hottest things in the last 6 months was user-generated content or user-like generated content. Funnily enough, we also have seen success of this type of creative on the SDK networks, which we didn't expect, and we're works on paid social, let's try it out, why not? And it's and then, I don't know, on Unity and AppLovin, we've seen some of the creatives really dominate the ad spend for quite some time. So yeah, it's all about testing. It's all about checking different approaches, different creatives, maybe going beyond and against the best practices somehow.
Yeah, we had a really interesting talk about testing creatives this morning with in-game advertising and with brands. And with, again, the lack of transparency in the data points, we don't have as much data now. How are you working with brands to help them create the more successful ads for in-game?
I go first? Yeah, I mean, again, we've seen evolution of in-game ad formats. So a lot of learnings. I did a campaign at my last company for Calvin Klein. And remember, at this stage, in-game ads were completely non-clickable, branding only, they're native, they're in the game, they're purely just there as part of the scenery, right? They're meant to look and feel like real world ads. So it's very difficult to measure, right? There's no click, there's no direct action. So the brand was Calvin Klein and the aftershave was Defy. It was a huge campaign globally. It was in the real world, on billboards, and also in the game. So what we did was, on the advertising side, we recommended they worked with like a brand uplift partner. And what they'll do is they'll actually put a tag inside the ad. They track who the user is, the gamers who've seen the ad, and then they survey them.
So they track them back to the website.
They track it back. Well, they track it back to the user, and it's
then
an opt-in sort of survey.
okay.
Yeah. And that particular campaign was one of the first sort of really big brands to do an extensive multi-market campaign across about 50 different games, different mobile apps.
And what sort of games were they choosing for that campaign?
I mean, everything. The only stipulation they had was just brand safe, so nothing with lots of violence.
Yeah.
So anything sort of PEGI 18 was not included. But yeah, racing games, hyper casual games, anywhere where they had that sort of ad placement, a good viewable size of an ad. And I think what was quite surprising really was obviously Calvin Klein's a really well-known brand anyway, but this particular campaign for in-game showed that format drove over half of the people who saw it to take an action. And by take an action, that could be visit the website, type it in on Google, research the product, research the aftershave,
excellent metrics.
Which is very good. And they came back, we got a statement from their head of marketing saying, we were actually shocked that it was as high as that. So we had really no expectations. I don't think they did either at the time. But again, using these kind of tools, if it's not clickable, that you kind of have to think of a way to
So you're giving, good case study metrics from tags that you're using from the campaigns. Is that the sort of thing that brands are looking for from convincing them into putting them their money into creating creatives for games, actually putting budget from performance marketing where they know it works elsewhere to the unknown? Is that the sort of metric that brands are talking to?
Yeah, I mean, ROI is obviously, there needs to be something there to do it. I think there have been test budgets in the past, but now it's kind of getting a little bit more serious. Gaming is becoming part of plans, even though there is still this education piece to be done. I think the big thing, as well as what I try and encourage, is like collaboration with the game's publisher or developer, so you start seeing some metrics on their side as well. So, is there increased community engagement, second screen exposure, things that, sort of bringing those two data points together so you get like a full 360 view of the success of a campaign.
So like a multiple touch point that you would get in normal brand marketing.
Yeah, so you kind of understand, and then that helps again with the education piece around, gaming isn't just the screen, there's interaction points beyond that when people are engaging with a game. So sort of building that, but ultimately data drives the decision making process. You're not going to get people to spend a lot of money without that being there. But I think being inventive, if a game has a big community, how can the brand leverage that and leverage that well, because that's a really powerful tool if you get it right, that then, to Nina's point, there are probably non-measurable engagements with the brand there that, maybe the game's publisher developer can sort of help with other pieces, maybe outside of the game, other parts of their ecosystem that would, benefit from that sort of brand engagement.
Excellent. And this measurement thing, are we getting any closer for in-game and for brand advertising in games? Are we getting closer to working with maybe people like the IAB and is that?
I hate this question.
I'm sorry. It is annoying.
It's the bane of my life, measurement. No, I mean, it's a good point. I think everybody does need to understand where we are today. So measurement for, rewarded video and interstitial is there, right? So that format, you can see exactly the results that you're getting from it. Where it gets a bit more complicated is non-clickable or native formats where there isn't a direct engagement. At the moment, I would say most brands will use viewability as a metric. The challenge we have as an industry at the moment is there is no standardized open measurement SDK, not for 3D. It exists for web and 2D. For display, it's been around for a long time. It's sort of the gold standard of advertising, that you have these minimum benchmarks as an advertiser. It's called media quality, so people don't have to pay for ads that aren't viewable, ads that aren't seen, poor quality, they're not rendered properly. So even though the technology today for in-game advertising is very, very good, ads are viewable, they are rendered properly, unfortunately the measurement piece is still a little bit away. Now what's happening at the moment is all of the sort of independent businesses have their own proprietary measurement tool, and then they'll have like a third party come in and verify that tool, right? So they're not marking their own homework sort of thing. But yeah, unfortunately today there isn't a standard for the industry, but I can speak with confidence when I say that most of the monetization companies out there who provide in-game, they are verified, they're regulated, they're not just making up the results. So you can trust as a brand, if you're working with ADSME or Adverty or any of the other companies out there, if it's in-game and it's being measured and they're providing a report, it's legit. I don't think there's anything dodgy going on there. But yeah, I think we're probably about a year or so away from an official standard for the industry.
Yeah. And licensing models, that's another thing that you work with, particularly Charlotte. You work with publishers to go and identify a way of working with them on the licensing side. How does that translate to developers?
So there's no standardization there because every publisher's
that's the wild west, is it?
Depends what you're doing. You can look at sort of tenancy models, so if you were sort of similar to in-game advertising, sort of static images that you might have within a game, or you can look at sort of integrating them within in-game items, cosmetic packs, and then you can look at sort of business models around, DLC. Maybe you split the revenue with a licensor and have that there. It's a more established model. It's been happening obviously for many years within the games industry. It can be a minefield in terms of sort of exclusivity, restrictions. Some brands are quite protective about how maybe their car is represented. So you have to think about things like damage, and they might not want their car to be damaged. So if that's a part of the game, you have to think about how you would include that and keeping it authentic to your game, not sacrificing that. But it's another way to bring brands in and, have that engagement there, maybe even see how your player base, reacts to having real life brands in there, and then sort of maybe taking it a step further and implementing
on a previous panel we saw quite a lot about how real life brands are sort of coming in and with rewards and everything else. But it brings me on to timing, because there's a lot to do with advertising and success of advertising, the time that it's delivered. And it's interesting to me when I speak to Tony and we're talking about how managing the waterfalls and everything else is getting easier, and it's getting a little bit harder to just, to test out for in-game, and that's getting there. But how important is timing? I'm going to go straight to Tony and talk about when you advertise, not just what creative and everything else.
Oh, sure.
Timing.
Well, which side?
Why don't you choose a side?
Cool. Yeah, I've kind of build off what you said there as well. And that, when companies for the last while have been trying to integrate ads into their games, there was an awful lot of moving pieces, right? It was simultaneously, am I putting ads in the right places? Am I frequency capping correctly? And also, is my waterfall set up so that I'm actually getting accurate results, right? That part has become a lot easier over the last couple of years with the introduction of in-app bidding. Almost every single major network now, with Google being the last one, who's just started and opened up their beta, at least with Max and with another couple of platforms. The vast majority now of demand is going to be bidded, which allows game developers to be sure that they're maximizing their yield on each impression. And this enables, it somewhat changes the role and develops the role of the monetization manager, and moves it much more towards a product role, right?
Yeah.
Where you're starting to really consider when you like show an ad inside of your game, which users are you showing it to, and that, because there's actually a wealth of in-app analytics around this that you can still use, right? Whether it's A/B testing waterfalls or A/B testing placements and frequencies, you can get a lot of really strong data back very quickly on how changes you're making are affecting not only your ARPDAU but also your LTV and your retention as well. So yeah, in some ways it's gotten a little bit easier because there has been, in-app bidding has really brought the industry forward. But on top of that, it's also developing the role and allowing people to spend more time on pursuits that I think are more interesting than just managing waterfalls. But also are really help to bring a game forward and ensure that you are monetizing your users as well as possible. From a placement perspective, just I think the most natural place to put it is in natural breaks in gameplay.
Yes.
Right? Also, people can consider using app open ads with a splash screen at the start that shows that conveys to the user that their content is loading and they can watch an ad in the meantime. And those work really well as well to expand your expand the amount of users that are actually going to be watching ads on top of, let's say, just rewarded. And banners work very well as well. So yeah, I've covered a lot there.
You covered loads. In terms of timing, let me move to you then, Alexi. When you're planning out your UA campaigns, how important is timing in your placements?
Timing from the perspective of when to run the UA campaigns, or timing when to address the user? Because both of them is going to be actually important.
Yeah.
Yeah, let me try to cover both maybe of those. In terms of the UA campaigns, I guess especially on the rather indie-focused conference as it is, I can say that you can launch the game even without the marketing budget. Even without the UA, you could be successful. There are quite a lot of options, and I know that it's counterintuitive, me saying as being the UA guy, that you can work even without me sometimes. But there are quite a lot of other opportunities pre-registrations that you can be running, the organic uplift or organic things, how to kind of spread the word about the game. However, if you'd like to scale up your game, unfortunately, there is not much way around that. So if you're seeing a good success within the first, I don't know, several months, half a year, it is worth considering investing into the UA. And again, it doesn't need to be an extreme budget. Also, there are quite a lot of partners that are offering ad coupons for the new games that are promising, and many other programs where you can participate as well. From the perspective of delivering the ads to the user, and that's actually was also rather important or interesting topic for us, we basically analyzed, especially for the countries, or for the more important countries from the LTV user LTV perspective, when to address the user. So what is the best timing? Specifically, the US was our test case. What time zones do we need to address, and what are even the most important states basically for us to go for? And we tried to kind of nail down those time zones and to increase the intensity of ads on our ad spend during the those time zones. And that was quite a successful test for us. As in, it was very profitable. However, the scalability of this approach is rather restricted.
I was going to say, how scalable is that? Because
unfortunately,
that's really
was not.
The granularity, isn't it?
It is really very granular approach, but the scalability is restricted, definitely. You can, especially with the UA being algorithm driven to a very high extent, there are some opportunities how to scale it up, but it's not definitely going to be, I don't know, 50-60% of your UA budget for those kind of campaign. There is, though, an incremental uplift on the revenue that you can go with that.
And I guess it just depends on the game, and it depends on a lot of other outside factors.
Definitely, it's a very big puzzle, and every piece of that, unfortunately or fortunately, contributes to that, and you kind of need to factor it in. That all comes together as a single picture.
It's interesting because I see a lot of these, just integrate the SDK, this is easy, but at the end of the day, it is hard work, and it's good to hear that other people go through that kind of every iteration of the process, the staged approach that you really have to go through, no matter which game it is. And it's coming back down to that sort of individual, we're all individuals as gamers, as players, and we want things delivered to us a little bit like we see on Google, that's replicating our browsing experience. So, our players are now more demanding because they're used to being treated so well as well. So that's making advertising to them even harder. Talking about change, because we are all having to change a lot, what's your view, and we're sort of getting to the last few minutes of this panel, from an in-game perspective and from a branding games perspective? I hear a lot of developers saying to me, yeah, it all sounds great, but I tried this before and it did not work for me. The SDK caused all sort of problems in my game. It was hard to integrate. It wasn't what it promised. What do you say to those developers to say, look, been there, done that, I'm going to stick with the old faithfuls. I know what works for me.
I think it's a shame if people have had bad experiences. I think the technology for in-game in particular is evolving all the time. It's quite a nascent piece of technology, so I think the providers are learning with the developers. I think if you have the capacity to be collaborative with the provider, I think you'll benefit more. So work with them so that you can explore the pain points, understand that, and help them develop the technology. But I think, if it's right for your game and you've made the decision to have brands in your game, stick with the idea that authenticity might open up new users, might open up new opportunities, new revenue streams, that otherwise might not be there. And I think, the incremental revenue, if done right, can be done in a way that can actually be really beneficial to your game, to your player. There are some games obviously where it makes no sense, and I think I've seen that done, and that's a bad experience for everybody. But I think if it makes sense for your game and you've made that decision, I would say trust the process. Explore your options. Speak to people, understand some of the pain points before you kind of maybe make those commitments, and look at maybe testings and licensing initially, and then sort of building up to a bigger overall strategy for brands within games.
I agree. No, I not much to add to that, because obviously I'm on the advertiser side, but I have worked with a number of games at different companies who've tried SDKs for various, and I think I do predict that in a number of years from now, you'll see something similar to what we see in the web today, which is where you have monetization pixels and you have many of them. It's not unusual to have 50 or 60 various monetization pixels. I think we'll start to see that as the technology becomes more dependable, but it's certainly getting there. And I agree with you. I think it's easy to just get put off if you have a bad experience, but it's like anything. I mean, it doesn't mean that everyone who creates an SDK for monetization has a bad one. It's just it's the beginning of the technology. It is rapidly getting a lot more stable, faster, better at generating revenue, and it takes time. I think actually, on the other hand, getting in early is better. It's a fast mover industry. I think you want to be early to adopt the technology, to understand it, to make your learnings from it, and then as it evolves, be the first one to test. I think it's like anything. You just have to be a bit brave, and try it.
Tony, any words of wisdom? You're agreeing?
I suppose. At least from, I don't have any experience with the in-game native advertising. I'll say from from traditional, let's say, formats of inters, banners, native, the scroll native, rewarded. Yeah, the SDKs have become an awful lot more stable in the last couple of years, and the integration process for any mediation platform now has become way simpler. You could usually half a day of one dev's time, and all the adapters are pretty much just click a button and they're automatically integrated. So yeah, the effort on that side has been massively pulled down. Of course, very much focus on the largest networks and least to start, so that you're not integrating more networks than necessary, and then gradually add on more and A/B test to see whether or not they provide incremental uplift before adding in 20 new different network SDKs that may not add an awful lot of value to you, depending on what geos or wherever you're running. But yeah.
Lexi?
Yeah, to be honest, I mean, I'm kind of supporting very much what all of the other guys on the panel were talking as well. I like not to integrate or not to look for in-game ads. Ways of monetization of the game is going to be very narrow-minded in this day and age, to be honest. Hybrid monetization is definitely incremental in comparison to IAA or IP only, and there are multiple ways of how you can make it work, basically.
Yeah.
From the SDK perspective, it is way easier to integrate it. From the game design perspective, unfortunately, or from the product perspective, it is still tricky how to make it a seamless process and not to aggravate the users and not to kind of let them churn because of how intrusive the ads are or how it breaks down or breaks up the game process or a gameplay loop. So that's definitely something that needs to be factored in. From the UA perspective, we can actually support the different kind of monetization. On the example of the mid-core to hardcore games, the focus regularly is on the in-app purchases. However, for the tier 3 markets or for the markets with a lower LTV of the payers, you can basically add, I don't know, add mon to the name of the ad or of your campaign, and you basically enable the ads only for this specific segment of the audience, for the ones that has been playing for some time from the certain geo or something like that. So the mix can go very granular, and you can actually make sure that you're also monetizing your audience that is playing your game very well. So yeah, please look into that. Even if you have had a bad example or a bad experience 2-3 years ago, 1 year ago, whatever, the industry has evolved a lot, and it's never been that easy to kind of to monetize your audience.
Very true.